This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Napoleon of Notting Hill by G. K. Chesterton. Section 7, Book 3, Chapter 1. The Mental Condition of Adam Wayne. A little while after the King's accession, a small book of poems appeared, called Hymns on the Hill. They were not good poems, nor was the book successful, but it attracted a certain amount of attention from one particular school of critics. The King himself, who was a member of the school, reviewed it in his capacity of literary critic to Straight from the Stables, a sporting journal. They were known as the Hammock School, because it had been calculated malignantly by an enemy that no less than 13 of their delicate criticisms had begun with the words, "I read this book in a hammock, half asleep in the sleepy sunlight. I." After that there were important differences. Under these conditions they liked everything, but especially everything silly. Next to authentic goodness in a book, they said, next to authentic goodness in a book, and that, alas, we never find, we desire a rich badness. Thus it happened that their praise, as indicating the presence of a rich badness, was not universally sought after, and authors became a little disquieted when they found the eye of the Hammock School fixed upon them with a peculiar favour. The peculiarity of Hymns on the Hill was the celebration of the poetry of London as distinct from the poetry of the country. This sentiment or affectation was, of course, not uncommon in the 20th century, nor was it, although sometimes exaggerated and sometimes artificial, by any means without a great truth at its root. For there is one respect in which a town must be more poetical than the country, since it is closer to the spirit of a man. For London, if it be not one of the masterpieces of man, is at least one of his sins. A street is really more poetical than a meadow, because a street has a secret. A street is going somewhere, and a meadow nowhere. But in the case of the books called Hymns on the Hill, there was another peculiarity, which the King pointed out with great acumen in his review. He was naturally interested in the matter, for he had himself published a volume of lyrics about London under his pseudonym of Daisy Daydream. This difference, as the King pointed out, consisted in the fact that while mere artificers like Daisy Daydream, on whose elaborate style the King over his signature of Thunderbolt was perhaps somewhat too severe, thought to praise London by comparing it to the country, using nature, that is, as a background from which all poetical images had to be drawn. The more robust author of Hymns on the Hill praised the country or nature by comparing it to the town, and used the town itself as a background. Take, said the critic, the typically feminine lines to the inventor of the hansom cab poet, whose cunning carved this amorous shell where twain may dwell. Surely, wrote the King, no one but a woman could have written those lines. A woman has always a weakness for nature. With her, art is only beautiful as an echo or a shadow of it. She is praising the hansom cab by a theme and theory, but her soul is still a child by the sea, picking up shells. She can never be utterly of the town as a man can. Indeed, do we not speak with sacred propriety of a man about town? Who ever spoke of a woman about town? However much physically about town a woman may be, she still models herself on nature. She tries to carry nature with her. She bids grasses to grow in her head, and furry beasts to bite her about the throat. In the heart of a dim city she models her bat on a flaring cottage garden of flowers. We, with our nobler civic sentiment, model ours on a chimney-pot, the ensign of civilization. And rather than be without birds, she will commit massacre, that she may turn her head into a tree with dead birds to sing on it. This kind of thing went on for several pages, and then the critic remembered his subject and returned to it. Poet, whose cunning carved this amorous shell where twain may dwell. The peculiarity of these fine though feminine lines, continued Thunderbolt, is, as we have said, that they praise the hansom cab by comparing it to the shell, to a natural thing. Now hear the author of Hymns on the Hill, and how he deals with the same subject. In his fine nocturne entitled The Last Omnibus, he relieves the rich and poignant melancholy of the theme by a sudden sense of rushing at the end. The wind round the old street corner swung sudden, as quick as a cab. Here the distinction is obvious. Daisy Daydream thinks it a great compliment to a hansom cab to be compared to one of the spiral chambers of the sea, and the author of Hymns on the Hill thinks it a great compliment to the immortal whirlwind to be compared to a hackney coach. He surely is the real admirer of London. We have no space to speak of all his perfect applications of the idea, of the poem in which, for instance, a lady's eyes are compared not to stars but to two perfect street lamps guiding the wanderer. We have no space to speak of the fine lyric recalling the Elizabethan spirit, in which the poet, instead of saying the rose and the lily contend in her complexion, says with a purer modernism that the red omnibus of Hammersmith and the white omnibus of Fulham fight there for the mastery. How perfect the image of two contending omnibuses! Here, somewhat abruptly, the review concluded, probably because the King had to send off his copy at that moment, as he was in some want of money. But the King was a very good critic, whatever he may have been as a king, and he had, to a considerable extent, hit the right nail on the head. Hymns on the Hill was not at all like the poems originally published in praise of the poetry of London, and the reason was that it was written by a man who had seen nothing else but London, and who regarded it, therefore, as the universe. It was written by a raw, red-headed lad of 17 named Adam Wayne, who had been born in Notting Hill. An accident in his 7th year prevented his being taken away to the seaside, and thus his whole life had been passed in his own Pump Street and in its neighbourhood. The consequence was that he saw the street lamps as things quite as eternal as the stars. The two fires were mingled. He saw the houses as things enduring like the mountains, and so he wrote about them as one would write about mountains. Nature puts on a disguise when she speaks to every man. To this man she put on the disguise of Notting Hill. Nature would mean to a poet born in the Cumberland Hills a stormy skyline and sudden rocks. Nature would mean to a poet born in the Essex Flats a waste of splendid waters and splendid sunsets. So Nature meant to this man Wayne a line of violet roofs and lemon lamps, the chiaroscuro of the town. He did not think it clever or funny to praise the shadows and the colours of the town. He had seen no other shadows or colours, and so he praised them, because they were shadows and colours. He saw all this because he was a poet, though in practice a bad poet. It is too often forgotten that just as a bad man is nevertheless a man, so a bad poet is nevertheless a poet. Mr. Wayne's little volume of verse was a complete failure, and he submitted to the decision of fate with a quite rational humility, went back to his work, which was that of a draper's assistant, wrote no more. He still retained his feeling about the town of Notting Hill, because he could not possibly have any other feeling, because it was the back and base of his brain. But he does not seem to have made any particular attempt to express it or insist upon it. He was a genuine natural mystic, one of those who live on the border of fairyland, but he was perhaps the first to realize how often the boundary of fairyland runs through a crowded city. 20 feet from him, for he was very short-sighted, the red and white and yellow suns of the gaslights thronged and melted into each other like an orchard of fiery trees, the beginnings of the woods of Elfland. But oddly enough, it was because he was a small poet that he came to his strange and isolated triumph. It was because he was a failure in literature that he became a portent in English history. He was one of those to whom nature has given the desire without the power of artistic expression. He had been a dumb poet from his cradle. He might have been so to his grave, and carried unuttered into the darkness a treasure of new and sensational song. But he was born under the lucky star of a single coincidence. He happened to be the head of his dingy municipality at the time of the King's jest, at the time when all municipalities were suddenly commanded to break out into banners and flowers. Out of the long procession of the silent poets who have been passing since the beginning of the world, this one man found himself in the midst of an heraldic vision, in which he could act and speak and live lyrically, while the author and the victims alike treated the whole matter as a silly public charade. This one man, by taking it seriously, sprang suddenly into a throne of artistic omnipotence. Armour, music, standards, watchfires, the noise of drums, all the theatrical properties were thrown before him. This one poor rhymester, having burnt his own rhymes, began to live that life of open air and acted poetry, of which all the poets of the earth have dreamed in vain, the life for which the Iliad is only a cheap substitute. Upwards from his abstracted childhood, Adam Wayne had grown strongly and silently in a certain quality or capacity which is in modern cities almost entirely artificial, but which can be natural, and was primarily almost brutally natural in him: the quality or capacity of patriotism. It exists, like other virtues and vices, in a certain undiluted reality. It is not confused with all kinds of other things. A child speaking of his country or his village may make every mistake in Mandeville, or tell every lie in Munchausen, but in his statement there will be no psychological lies any more than there can be in a good song. Adam Wayne, as a boy, had for his dull streets in Notting Hill the ultimate and ancient sentiment that went out to Athens or Jerusalem. He knew the secret of the passion, those secrets which make real old national songs sound so strange to our civilization. He knew that real patriotism tends to sing about sorrows and forlorn hopes much more than about victory. He knew that in proper names themselves is half the poetry of all the national poems. Above all, he knew the supreme psychological fact about patriotism, as certain in connection with it as that a fine shame comes to all lovers: the fact that the patriot never under any circumstances boasts of the largeness of his country, but always and of necessity boasts of the smallness of it. All this he knew, not because he was a philosopher or genius, but because he was a child. Anyone who cares to walk up a side slum like Pump Street can see a little Adam claiming to be king of a paving stone, and he will always be proudest if the stone is almost too narrow for him to keep his feet inside it. It was while he was in such a dream of defensive battle, marking out some strip of street or fortress or steps as the limit of his haughty claim, that the king had met him, and with a few words flung in mockery ratified for ever the strange boundaries of his soul. Thenceforward the fanciful idea of the defence of Notting Hill in war became to him a thing as solid as eating or drinking or lighting a pipe. He disposed his meals for it, altered his plans for it, lay awake in the night and went over it again. 2 or 3 shops were to him an arsenal. An area was to him a moat. Corners of balconies and turns of stone steps were points for the location of a culverin or an archer. It is almost impossible to convey to any ordinary imagination the degree to which he had transmitted the leaden London landscape to a romantic gold. The process began almost in babyhood, and became habitual like a literal madness. It was felt most keenly at night, when London is really herself, when her lights shine in the darkness like the eyes of innumerable cats, and the outline of the dark houses has the bold simplicity of the blue hills. But for him the night revealed instead of concealing, and he read all the blank hours of morning and afternoon by a contradictory phrase in the light of that darkness. To this man, at any rate, the inconceivable had happened. The artificial city had become to him nature, and he felt the curbstones and gas lamps as things as ancient as the sky. One instance may suffice. walking along Pump Street with a friend, he said, as he gazed dreamily at the iron fence of a little front garden, "How those railings stir one's blood!" His friend, who was also a great intellectual admirer, looked at them painfully, but without any particular emotion. He was so troubled about it that he went back quite a large number of times on quiet evenings and stared at the railings, waiting for something to happen to his blood, but without success. At last he took refuge in asking Wayne himself. He discovered that the ecstasy lay in the one point he had never noticed about the railings, even after his 6 visits: the fact that they were, like the great majority of others in London, shaped at the top after the manner of a spear. As a child, Wayne had half unconsciously compared them with the spears in pictures of Lancelot and Sir George, and had grown up under the shadow of the graphic association. Now, whenever he looked at them, they were simply the serried weapons that made a hedge of steel round the sacred homes of Notting Hill. He could not have cleansed his mind of that meaning if he had tried. It was not a fanciful comparison or anything like it. It would not have been true to say that the familiar railings reminded him of spears. It would have been far truer to say that the familiar spears occasionally reminded him of railings. A couple of days after his interview with the King, Adam Wayne was pacing like a caged lion in front of 5 shops that occupied the upper end of the disputed street. They were a grocer's, a chemist's, a barber's, and an old curiosity shop and a toy shop that sold also newspapers. It was these 5 shops which his childish fastidiousness had first selected as the essentials of Notting Hill campaign, the citadel of the city. If Notting Hill was the heart of the universe, and Pump Street was the heart of Notting Hill, this was the heart of Pump Street. The fact that they were all small and side by side realized that feeling for formidable comfort and compactness which, as we have said, was the heart of his patriotism, and of all patriotism. The grocer, who had a wine and spirit license, was included because he could provision the garrisons; the old curiosity shop because it contained enough swords, pistols, partisans, crossbows, and blunderbusses to arm a whole irregular regiment; the toy and paper shop because Wayne thought a free press an essential centre for the soul of Pump Street; the chemist's to cope with outbreaks of disease among the besieged; and the barber's because it was in the middle of all the rest, and the barber's son was an intimate friend and spiritual affinity. It was a cloudless October evening, settling down through purple into pure silver round the roofs and chimneys of the steep little street, which looked black and sharp and dramatic. In the deep shadows the gas-lit shop fronts gleamed like 5 fires in a row, and before them, darkly outlined like a ghost against some purgatorial furnaces, passed to and fro the tall bird-like figure and eagle nose of Adam Wayne. He swung his stick restlessly and seemed fitfully talking to himself. "There are, after all, enigmas," he said, "even to the man who has faith. There are doubts that remain even after the true philosophy is completed in every rung and rivet. And here is one of them. Is the normal human need, the normal condition, higher or lower than those special states of the soul which call out a doubtful and dangerous glory, those special powers of knowledge or sacrifice which are made possible only by the existence of evil? Which should come first to our affections, the enduring sanities of peace or the half-maniacal virtues of battle? Which should come first, the man great in the daily round or the man great in emergency? Which should come first, to return to the enigma before me, the grocer or the chemist? Which is more certainly the stay of the city, the swift, chivalrous chemist or the benign, all-providing grocer? In such ultimate spiritual doubts it is only possible to choose a side by the higher instincts, and to abide the issue. In any case, I have made my choice. May I be pardoned if I choose wrongly, but I choose the grocer." "Good morning, sir," said the grocer, who was a middle-aged man, partially bald, with harsh red whiskers and a beard, and a forehead lined with all the cares of small tradesmen. "What can I do for you, sir?" Wayne removed his hat on entering the shop with a ceremonious gesture which, slight as it was, made the tradesman eye him with the beginnings of wonder. "I come, sir," he said soberly, "to appeal to your patriotism." "Why, sir," said the grocer, "that sounds like the times when I was a boy and we used to have elections." "You will have them again," said Wayne firmly, "and far greater things. Listen, Mr. Mead. I know the temptations which a grocer has to a too cosmopolitan philosophy. I can imagine what it must be to sit all day as you do, surrounded with wares from all the ends of the earth, from strange seas that we have never sailed, and strange forests that we could not even picture. No Eastern king ever had such argosies or such cargoes coming from the sunrise and the sunset, and Solomon in all his glory was not enriched like one of you. India is at your elbow," he cried, lifting his voice and pointing his stick at a drawer of rice. The grocer made a movement of some alarm. "China is before you. Demerara is behind you. America is above your head, and at this very moment, like some old Spanish admiral, you hold Tunis in your hands." Mr. Mead dropped the box of dates which he was just lifting, and then picked it up again vaguely. Wayne went on with a heightened colour but lowered voice. "I know, I say, the temptations of so international, so universal a vision of wealth. I know that it must be your danger not to fall, like many tradesmen, into too dusty and mechanical a narrowness, but rather to be too broad, to be too general, to be too liberal. If a narrow nationalism be the danger of the pastry cook who makes his own wares under his own heavens, no less is cosmopolitanism the danger of a grocer. But I come to you in the name of that patriotism which no wanderings or enlightenments should ever wholly extinguish, and I ask you to remember Notting Hill. For after all, in this cosmopolitan magnificence she has played no small part. Your dates may come from the tall palms of Barbary, your sugar from the strange islands of the tropics, your tea from the secret villages of the Empire of the Dragon. That this room might be furnished, forests may have been spoiled under the Southern Cross, and leviathans speared under the Polar Star. But you yourself, surely, no inconsiderable treasure. You yourself, the brain that wields these vast interests. You yourself, at least, have grown to strength and wisdom between these grey houses and under this rainy sky. This city, which made you and thus made your fortunes, is threatened with war. Come forth and tell to the ends of the earth this lesson. Oil is from the north and fruits from the south, rice is from India and spices from Ceylon. Sheep are from New Zealand, and men from Notting Hill." The grocer sat for some little while with dim eyes and his mouth open, looking rather like a fish. Then he scratched the back of his head and said nothing. Then he said, "Anything out of the shop, sir?" Wayne looked round in a dazed way, seeing a pile of tins of pineapple chunks, and he waved his stick generally towards him. "Yes," he said, "I'll take those." "All those, sir?" said the grocer, with greatly increased interest. Yes, all those," said Wayne, still a little bewildered, like a man splashed with cold water. "Very good, sir, thank you," said the grocer with animation. "You may count upon my patriotism, sir." "I count upon it already," said Wayne, and passed out into the gathering night. The grocer put the box of dates back in its place. "What a nice fellow he is," he said. "It's odd how often they are nice, much nicer than those who are all right." Meanwhile Adam Wayne stood outside the glowing chemist's shop, unmistakably wavering. "What a weakness it is," he muttered. "I have never got rid of it from childhood. The fear of this magic shop. The grocer is rich, he is romantic, he is poetical in the truest sense, but he is not, no, he is not supernatural. But the chemist, all the other shops standing on Notting Hill, but this stands in Elfland. Look at those great burning bowls of colour. It must be from them that God paints the sunsets. It is superhuman, and the superhuman is all the more uncanny when it is beneficent. That is the root of the fear of God. I am afraid, but I must be a man and enter." He was a man, and entered. A short, dark young man was behind the counter with spectacles, and greeted him with a bright but entirely businesslike smile. "A fine evening, sir," he said. "Fine indeed. strange father," said Adam, stretching his hand somewhat forward. "It is on such clear and mellow nights that your shop is most itself. Then they appear most perfect, those moons of green and gold and crimson, which from afar off guide the pilgrim of pain and sickness to this house of merciful witchcraft." "Can I get you anything?" asked the chemist. "Let me see," said Wayne, in a friendly but vague manner. "Let me have some sal volatile." "Eightpence, tenpence, or 1 and 6 a bottle," said the young man genially. 1 and 6. 1 and 6, replied Wayne, with a wild submissiveness. "I come to ask you, Mr. Bowles, a terrible question." He paused and collected himself. "It is necessary," he muttered, "it is necessary to be tactful and to suit the appeal to each profession in turn. I come," he resumed aloud, "to ask you a question which goes to the roots of your miraculous toils, Mr. Bowles. Shall all this witchery cease?" And he waved his stick round the shop. Meeting with no answer, he continued with animation. "In Notting Hill we have felt to its core the elvish mystery of your profession, and now Notting Hill itself is threatened." "Anything more, sir?" said the chemist. "Oh," said Wayne, somewhat disturbed. "Oh, what is it chemists sell? Quinine, I think. Thank you. Shall it be destroyed? I have met these men of Bayswater and North Kensington, Mr. Bowles. They are materialists. They see no witchery in your work, even when it is wrought within their own borders. They think the chemist is commonplace. They think him human." The chemist appeared to pause only a moment to take in the insult, and immediately said, "And the next article, please." "Alum," said the Provost wildly. "I resume. It is in this sacred town alone that your priesthood is reverenced. Therefore, when you fight for us, you fight not only for yourself, but for everything you typify. You fight not only for Notting Hill, but for Fairyland. For as surely as Buck and Barker and such men hold sway, the sense of Fairyland in some strange manner diminishes." "Anything more, sir?" asked Mr. Bowles, with unbroken cheerfulness. "Oh yes, jujubes, Gregory powder, magnesia. The danger is imminent. In all this matter I have felt that I fought not merely for my own city, though to that I owe all my blood, but for all places in which these great ideas could prevail. I am fighting not merely for Notting Hill, but for Bayswater itself, for North Kensington itself. For if the gold hunters prevail, these also will lose all their ancient sentiments and all the mystery of their national soul. I know I can count upon you." "Oh yes, sir," said the chemist, with great animation. "We are always glad to oblige a good customer." Adam Wayne went out of the shop with a deep sense of fulfilment of soul. "It is so fortunate," he said, "to have tact, to be able to play upon the peculiar talents and specialities, the cosmopolitanism of the grocer, and the world-old necromancy of the chemist. Where should I be without tact?" End of Book 3, Chapter 1.